The old woman fell to her knees in the mud, her hands shaking as the cold water dripped down her wrinkled face, and the entire wedding hall burst into laughter. Nobody in that crowd of 200 guests knew that the woman they had just humiliated owned the very ground they were standing on, the mansion behind them, and enough money to buy every single family in that room 3 times over. Nobody knew that in exactly 11 days, every single person laughing at her would lose everything they had. This is the story of Mama Igioma, the woman the world called a beggar, and the plan she had been building for almost 20 years. Before we go further, if stories like this keep you glued to the screen, hit that like button right now and subscribe to the channel. Because, trust me, the ending of this one is going to leave you speechless, and you don't want to miss what happens next. Alright, let's get into it. Mama Igioma was 68 years old, and for the past 3 years, she had been working as a cleaner and gardener for the Okankwe family, one of the wealthiest families in the city. Every morning at 5, before the sun even rose, she would walk 2 kilometers from a small rented room to the massive white compound on Lakeview Road, carrying her own broom, because the family refused to buy her one. She swept the long driveway, scrubbed the marble floors, trimmed the hedges, and washed windows so tall she needed a ladder that wobbled every time she climbed it. For all of this, she was paid a wage so small it barely covered her rent, and she was never once thanked. The head of the household, Chief Douglas had built his fortune in construction, or at least that was the story he told at every party. His wife, Patricia, wore designer clothes to the market and treated every servant in her home like furniture that occasionally needed to be scolded. Their son, Kelvin, was getting married in a few weeks to a woman named Vanessa, and the entire household had been transformed into a factory of preparation, decorations being hung, caterers running in and out, and Mama Igioma working twice as hard for the exact same pay. Nobody in that house had ever asked Mama Igioma a single question about her life. If they had, they would have learned something that would have changed everything. But they never asked, because to them, she was invisible. Just an old woman who existed to clean up after them and disappear into the background. What the Okankwe family did not know, what nobody in that entire neighborhood knew, was that Mama Igioma was not just some poor old cleaner scraping by. 22 years ago, her husband, Emmanuel, had owned nearly all the land in that part of the city. Back when it was nothing but bush and farmland that nobody wanted, he bought it for almost nothing, cleared it slowly over the years, and quietly built one of the largest private land portfolios in the region, all without ever telling a soul how much it was truly worth. When he passed away, he left everything to Mama Igioma, structured in such a way, through trusts and companies with names nobody could trace back to her, that she could live in complete secrecy if she chose to. And that is exactly what she chose to do. You see, Mama Igioma had watched wealth destroy people her entire life. She had watched her own younger brother inherit money and lose himself in it, turning cruel and arrogant almost overnight. She had watched neighbors who suddenly became rich stop recognizing their own family members on the street. So when her husband died and left her an empire disguised as ordinary land records, she made a decision that shocked even the 2 lawyers who managed her estate. She decided she would live simply, quietly, and she would use her freedom to see the world exactly as it truly was, not through the golden filter that money puts over everything. For the first 10 years, she simply lived. She traveled a little, she read, she grieved her husband in peace. But over time, a deeper purpose began to form in her mind, something her husband himself had once mentioned before he died. He told her that this exact plot of land, the one now called Lakeview Road, sitting right in the heart of what became prime real estate, was destined to become the most valuable property in the entire city within 20 years. It was right. And it was on this very land, this land she still legally owned every inch of, through a private holding company that leased it out under long, complicated contracts, that Chief Douglas Okankwe had built his mansion. That's right, the Okankwe family did not own their own home. They had signed a 9-to-9-year lease agreement over 2 decades ago with a mysterious holding company, believing they were simply paying property taxes to some faceless corporation. They had no idea that the woman sweeping their driveway every single morning was the sole owner of that very corporation, the same woman whose signature, buried in legal paperwork under a different formal name, had approved every renewal of their lease for the last 20 years. Mama Igioma took the cleaning job for one simple reason. She wanted to see, up close and without any disguise of wealth or status, what kind of people were living on her land, raising their children and preparing to pass their values down to the next generation. She had been quietly observing this family for 3 years, and what she saw broke her heart more than anything. She saw Patricia scream at the younger housegirls over spilled tea. She saw Chief Douglas boast to his friends about how he never paid his workers a single day early, laughing as if underpaying people was something to be proud of. She saw Kelvin, the groom-to-be, walk past elderly beggars on the street without so much as a glance, yet post long captions online about generosity and humility. And she saw, most painfully of all, how they treated her. An old woman, old enough to be their mother, with a level of disrespect that made the younger house staff whisper apologies to her when nobody else was watching. But Mama Ijeoma did not act out of anger. She was patient. She wanted to give this family every opportunity to show her, even hust onse, a shred of basic human decency. There were small moments along the way that almost gave her hope. Once, she twisted her ankle on the wet marble near the back kitchen, and for a brief second she thought Kelvin might help her up when he walked past. Instead, he stepped around her without breaking stride, more concerned about the mud on his shoes than the pain on her face. Another time, during a heavy rainstorm, she stood outside the gate for nearly 40 minutes because the guard had been told never to let her wait inside, not even under the covered porch, in case visitors mistook her for a member of the family. She remembered each of these moments quietly, not with bitterness, but with the calm patience of someone gathering evidence for a decision she had not yet made. And so she waited, watching closely, right up until the day of Kelvin's wedding, the biggest event this family had ever hosted, with important guests, business partners, and even a few local government officials in attendance. That morning, Mama Ijeoma arrived early as always, to help set up chairs and clean the compound before the event began. Patricia took one look at her old faded dress, the same dress she always wore, and decided that today, of all days, Mama Ijeoma's presence was an embarrassment. In front of the early guests already arriving, Patricia grabbed a jug of water meant for the flower arrangements and threw it directly at the old woman, telling her loudly that beggars had no business being seen near her son's wedding, that she should go stand somewhere the cameras would never find her. The crowd around them laughed. Some guests even took out their phones to record the moment, thinking it was simply comedic. An old woman drenched and stumbling in the mud, while a wealthy hostess scolded her like a misbehaving child. Kelvin, watching from a distance in his crisp white suit, said nothing. Chief Douglas, standing near the entrance, shaking hands with his business associates, glanced over, smirked, and turned back to his conversation as if nothing had happened at all. Mama Ijeoma slowly rose to her feet, water dripping from her gray hair, mud staining the hem of her dress. For a brief moment, the whole compound seemed to blur around her. The laughter, the music from the live band, the smell of jollof rice and fried plantain drifting from the catering tents, all of it fading into background noise as she looked directly at Patricia. She did not cry. She did not shout. She simply straightened her back, lifted her chin, and looked around at the laughing faces. The phone still recording, and for the first time in 3 years, she smiled, not out of humiliation, but because she finally had exactly what she needed: proof. Clear, undeniable proof, captured on dozens of phones by their own guests, of exactly who this family truly was, underneath their wealth and their manners. She said nothing that day. She simply picked up her broom, finished her work in silence, and walked home in her wet clothes as the wedding celebration roared on behind her, completely unaware that the countdown had already begun. If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure you're subscribed, because the next part is where everything changes, and I promise you will not see this coming. 11 days later, Chief Douglas received a formal letter from a law firm he did not recognize, informing him that the 99-year lease on Lakeview Road had been terminated effective immediately, citing a rarely used clause buried deep within the original contract. A clause allowing termination in cases where the property owner determined that continued occupancy was, in the language of the document, contrary to the moral character requirements outlined in the founding trust agreement. In simpler terms, the land was being taken back, and the family had 90 days to vacate the property that held their mansion, their memories, and every dollar they had poured into renovations over the past 2 decades. Chief Douglas was furious. He called every lawyer he knew, demanding to know who owned this holding company, who had the audacity to do this to him. It took his legal team almost a week to uncover the truth, and when they finally did, Chief Douglas sat in stunned silence in his office chair, staring at a single name on a certificate of ownership. Ijeoma Adaese Emmanuel, the full legal name of the old woman who had been sweeping his driveway for 3 years. His hands trembled as he read the document a second time, then a third, hoping the words would somehow rearrange themselves into something less devastating. Patricia, standing behind him, snatched the paper from his hands and read it herself, her face slowly draining of color as the reality settled in. Kelvin, still in his wedding suit from days earlier, simply stared at the floor, unable to speak. He rushed home that evening, gathering his wife and son, and together they drove to the small rented room where Mama Ijeoma lived, expecting to find some kind of mistake, some confused old woman who had no idea what her paperwork actually meant. Instead, they found her sitting calmly at a small wooden table, sipping tea, two well-dressed lawyers seated beside her, waiting for exactly this moment. Chief Douglas began to shout, demanding explanations, threatening lawsuits, insisting there had been some clerical error. Mama Ijeoma simply raised her hand, and the room fell silent. She told him, in a calm and steady voice, that she had lived quietly for 20 years, giving families like his every chance to prove that wealth had not stolen their humanity. She told him she had watched his family for 3 years, hoping, praying even, that she was wrong about what she saw. But on his son's wedding day, in front of 200 witnesses and countless cameras, his wife had confirmed everything she needed to know. She was not doing this out of cruelty, she explained. She was doing this because her husband's final wish, written into every legal document tied to that land, was that it should only ever be occupied by people who treated others, especially the poor and the powerless, with basic dignity. The Okonkwo family had failed that test spectacularly, and worse, they had failed it publicly, leaving behind more than enough evidence to make any court case they might attempt completely pointless. Here comes the twist that nobody in this story saw coming, not even Chief Douglas's lawyers. Mama Ijeoma revealed that she had been quietly transferring smaller portions of her land holdings, along with modest trust funds. 2 families in the community who had shown genuine kindness over the years, people who had no idea a simple act of decency, like offering her a cold drink of water on a hot afternoon, or helping her carry groceries, had been silently recorded and remembered. One of those families was that of Bisi, the young housegirl who worked alongside Mama Ijeoma in the Okonkwo mansion, the only person in that entire household who had ever offered her a seat, a warm meal, or a kind word in 3 long years. Bisi had no idea, until that very week, that the small kindnesses she showed an old cleaning woman would result in her own family receiving a modest piece of land and a trust fund large enough to send her younger siblings to school for the first time in their lives. When Mama Ijeoma told this story, sitting calmly across from the stunned Okonkwo family, even Chief Douglas had nothing left to say. In the weeks that followed, Mama Ijeoma quietly finalized the transfer of several more properties across the city, always to people who had shown small, unnoticed acts of kindness over the years. A taxi driver who once refused to charge her for a ride during a downpour, a shopkeeper who always rounded her total down instead of up, a schoolteacher who once walked an elderly stranger home after dark, simply because it felt like the right thing to do. None of them knew they were being watched. None of them expected anything in return. And that, Mama Ijeoma always said, was exactly the point. News of what happened spread through the city within days. The video of Patricia throwing water on an old woman resurfaced online, except now it carried a very different caption, one revealing exactly who that old woman truly was. The same guests who had laughed at the wedding were now sharing the video with captions of shock and disbelief. Business partners, who once respected Chief Douglas, quietly began distancing themselves. Within 2 months, the family had moved out of Lakeview Road entirely, downsizing into a modest apartment across the city, their name no longer opening the doors it once did. As for Mama Ijeoma, she did not gloat, and she did not seek revenge beyond what her husband's own wishes had already outlined. She simply returned to a quiet life, this time without needing to hide behind a broom and a faded dress, using her fortune to quietly support families across the city who reminded her, in small daily ways, that kindness still existed in a world that so often rewarded cruelty instead. The lesson in this story is simple, but it is one so many people forget the moment they gain even a little bit of power over someone else. You never truly know who is standing in front of you. The tired stranger on the street, the quiet cleaner in the corner, the old woman nobody bothers to greet. Treat every person with the same respect you would give someone you believe could change your entire life. Because sometimes, they actually can. If this story moved you even a little bit, drop a comment below and tell me what part hit you the hardest, because I read every single one of them, and I want to hear your thoughts. And if you know someone who needs a reminder to treat people with kindness, go ahead and share this video with them right now. It might mean more to them than you think. Thank you for watching all the way to the end, and I will see you in the next story.